This one salary negotiation move ended up being worth over $500,000 to me, and I've never heard anyone else mention it before. I was offered a job at a lower level than I'd hoped, and instead of saying no, I negotiated a 6-month reevaluation, and that one move changed everything for me. In this video, I'll describe to you exactly how this reevaluation worked, how to ask for it, and why it worked so well. Then at the end, I'll give you another bonus tip for how to use this same strategy to get a raise at your current position instead of waiting until you have a new job offer to increase your salary. If you're new here, I'm Ashley. I went from growing up in poverty to being retired by 30. On this channel, we discuss financial topics in a grounded, realistic way for those who didn't grow up with money. We all know that job searching is super difficult right now because it's an employer's market with all the recent layoffs we've had, especially in the tech world. If and when you do finally get an offer, it's very possible that it could be at a lower level or for a lower amount than you expected. Even when I was starting out in my career 15 years ago, of course this happened, I really had no idea how job negotiations work, and I was honestly happy just to get any offer. That was until a former coworker gave me this tip. If they underlevel you, ask to be reevaluated in 6 months instead of waiting for the typical year-long evaluation cycle. And it really sort of shifted my mindset from just being grateful for whatever I was offered to being strategic. And this shift from gratitude to strategy was really necessary because while gratitude is of course great, it doesn't pay the bills and it doesn't move us closer to our goals. So for that, we need strategy as well. As I've mentioned, the tip is asking for a reevaluation. So let me get more into what that is, how to ask for it, and how this tip really can help move the needle for you. So in my first job, I had a coworker. She was significantly older than me, but actually only a few years ahead of me in her career. She had stayed home with her kids for 20 years and kind of just moved into tech a few years beforehand. So she was super wise. She was the only other female software engineer at my company. And one day we went on a walk together and she decided to give me this advice that absolutely changed my life. She revealed to me the secret of how she'd been able to level up in her career so quickly, even though she'd only been in the field a few years. And so she said that if she was ever offered a job at the same level that she was currently at, so let's say she was a junior engineer, she applied for a new job and was offered another junior role, that she would ask for her level to be reevaluated in 6 months, and that she would get that kind of in writing as part of the offer. Now this can be huge because, you know, often in companies, you're not eligible for a promotion until you've been there for at least a year. I've even worked at companies before that do their promotion cycles once per year. You had to have been there a year before to be considered. Depending on your start date, by the time it comes up that you can be even considered for promotion, you've been there a year and a half, almost 2 years at that point. So getting a guarantee as part of your job offer that you can be considered for promotion in 6 months is a huge game changer. As I'll talk about in a little bit, for me, this actually ended up being worth way more than the value of just the actual promotion because it came off as a strong negotiation tactic, and so it ended up getting me more in the offer than if I had even been offered the higher position to begin with. And ended up getting my total compensation over the next few years increased by over $500,000 just from this one tip. But before I get into that in too much detail, I want to first talk a little bit more about the mindset behind it because I was not comfortable with negotiating my salary at this point. This was actually really the first time I had ever tried to negotiate a salary that I was offered. But what my coworker said to me that day really stuck out to me. She said that she was comfortable asking for this because she knew that she could count on herself to work hard. She said, I can always bet on myself. I know I'm hardworking. I know if I set this challenge for myself, then I'm gonna be able to get it. Whereas if I'm just waiting for my boss to kind of see that I'm worthy, that's not something I can control. I can control how hard I work. If I say to them, hey, I'm not a junior engineer like you've leveled me, I'm really mid-level, I know that I can spend the next 6 months working my butt off to make that work and to really prove that to them. And that really stuck out to me, that idea that I can negotiate aggressively because I am sure that I'm not going to let myself down, that I'm going to, you know, not only be an asset to the company, but be an asset to myself, prove to myself that I can do that and I can set this goal and set this challenge and make it happen. So that for me really kind of like reframed negotiation. Instead of just asking for more money and kind of feeling like I'm asking for a favor, like, hey, can you give me more money just because? I really felt like I was setting a challenge to myself and making a promise to myself that, hey, I'm gonna smash this. That reframe really made me a lot less squeamish to negotiate. The very worst thing that happens is in 6 months, they do the reevaluation, they say, no, I really don't think you're that next level yet. But at that point, you've one, gotten that feedback from your manager, and two, probably been able to prove yourself a lot more than if this hadn't been something that both you and your manager were keeping their eye on for the last 6 months. So you will very likely get promoted in the very next cycle because you're getting that early feedback and that early recognition for your efforts. So even if it doesn't work out in the 6-month reevaluation mark, you really don't lose anything by asking. So how did this tip make me so much money? The actual promotion itself was valued at about $15K. That's how much more mid-level developers made than junior developers at this point when I was applying for this job. But when I said, hey, thanks for the offer, I'd love to work for your company, but I really think that I'm a mid-level developer instead of a junior developer. Can I get your guarantee that my level can be reevaluated in 6 months after I've proven myself? They took this as a sign that I was unhappy with the job offer and the compensation. And I also really don't think that they thought that I would get promoted at 6 months, right? No one usually does this. I'm sure they hadn't had an experience of anything like this. And so of course they want to make sure that I'm not going to accept the job and then quit in another 6 months, right? So they wanted to make sure that I was overall happy with the compensation as it was being offered at the time. Since I was getting a junior salary, they decided to offer me more stock options, more equity than they typically do. Years later, when I was comparing salaries and equity with coworkers, I found out that I had about twice as much equity as most people who had started around the same time as me and at the same level. So I think that the equity amount that I got was nearly doubled just from this one negotiation tactic. Those options ended up being worth hundreds of thousands of extra dollars when the company was acquired just a few years later. And then when the 6 months hit and they reevaluated my level, they found that I was indeed performing at mid-level. So they gave me the raise to mid-level and paid me back pay for the 6 months that I had been making kind of the wrong salary. And then again, I had double the stock options. So just by asking for that one change in my offer, I ended up getting way more money out of this offer than had originally been expected. And over time, once the company was acquired, it ended up being so valuable to me. And all that just from shooting my shot and betting on myself. So I'm eternally grateful to that coworker. Shout out to her. If you ever see this, you know who you are. But just giving me that one tip completely changed my life. So let's talk about why this works, both from your end and from the company's end. First thing, like I mentioned, is that if you're nervous about negotiating your salary, this can feel like a kind of a lower stakes way to do this. Not that you should be nervous. You deserve however much you ask for. Asking for straight cash more than what they offer is a great thing too. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. But if for some reason you're nervous about that or that doesn't work out, this can be another potential avenue to try. Because to be clear, I wasn't actually unhappy with the original junior offer that I had gotten. It was at the same level that I was currently at. It was making way more money than I made in my current position. And so regardless of whether I was promoted to a mid-level or straight out of junior, it was a huge step up for me. And I felt so lucky to get this offer. And I did have one other offer at the time that was for a mid-level position, but even that mid-level position paid less than the junior position that they were offering me. So I didn't really have a lot of legs to stand on to just ask for more money. I decided to just try this anyway, and boy, did it pay off. So if you're nervous to negotiate, this can be kind of a lower stakes, lower lift way to negotiate. Also, this is a huge win for the company and for the recruiter. This is obviously not something that recruiters are measured on or that would come out of future hiring budgets. They're not giving you more money up front. They're still hiring within the stated salary bands, so it's a huge win for them. It also portrays confidence and an intent to work hard to your manager before you even start. And lastly, even when you get to that 6-month mark, you're not actually asking for a raise, right? You're asking for your level to be reevaluated. You're saying, hey, there was a mistake. I was hired at a lower level than what I'm performing at. Let's correct that mistake. So even then, the way that you're approaching the negotiations and framing it is not, hey, give me more money. It's, hey, let's just fix this simple mistake that was made in hiring. Because asking for a raise can sometimes feel like it comes off as hey, I'm so great, give me more money. But instead, this is saying your hiring processes were not well equipped to correctly identify my level. So let's fix this mistake. And that same mindset of asking for a raise, not as asking for a raise, but instead asking for an HR leveling mistake to be corrected, is actually the same tip that works for our bonus negotiation tip. So let's get into that. This is a strategy I've actually used successfully in my career twice to get raises, but again, I never asked for a raise. Instead of a raise, I asked for a market rate adjustment. What is that? Well, the company I worked for at the time, and many companies, used external benchmarking tools to decide their pay bands. So this is using a company like PayScale, and PayScale will tell you in your area for this level, if you want to pay 65% of market, so that means slightly above average in the market, that salary would be from this to this. So they're using an external company to help decide how much they should pay. However, the data that they get from these external vendors changes over time. That's why you'll often see new hires making more than someone who's been at the company for a couple years, right? It's not just like the company being unfair, it's also that the data that they use to determine how much they should pay people has changed. They don't change the salary of every employee in the company every time they get this new information, right? They usually have a standard policy of a 1% raise, 2% if you're like really high performing, and they just stick with that. And they're not trying to like catch you up to this new adjusted band. So instead of asking for a raise and going in and say something like, hey, I know the typical raise is 2%, but I think I should get a 5% raise because I've been working really hard and I know the new guy Ted makes more than me. You can say something like, I believe the market has shifted and I'm no longer in line with our pay scale benchmarks. Can we align my compensation to the current market rate? This framing as, again, just kind of like fixing an issue on HR's end. This works really well because the burden of proof for that is very different than the burden of proof for if you're trying to ask for double the raise that they normally give out, right? If they normally give 2% raises and you're asking for a 5% raise, and your reasoning for asking for that 5% is that, oh, I work so hard, you now need to prove that you work 2.5 times as hard as what is normally expected for that 2% raise, right? That's kind of a really hard thing to prove. But if what you're going to them and saying is, hey, I'm not within the current pay bands, that's actually super easy to prove. And of course, your manager is going to have to back that up with, hey, you know, she's a really good employee, we don't want to lose her. Of course, there is going to still be scrutiny on your work to make sure that you're performing at a high level, but because your performance is not necessarily the basis for this adjustment, again, it's not a raise, it's an adjustment, it just makes it so much easier to get through the HR funnels. And the key here really is that you're speaking the company's language, you're speaking HR's language. You're talking about the data and the market alignment tactics that HR already uses to decide compensation. You're not asking for extra, you're just asking to be in line with their current data. So that's it. That's a tip that I used that ended up making me over $500,000. What I really learned from getting this tip from a coworker is that progressing your career, progressing how much you make, it's not luck, it's leverage. It's seeing the game and figuring out how to play it differently. If you're job searching or you're already in a role where you feel you're underpaid or undervalued, this can help completely change your trajectory. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and you might also like this video about why it's harder for you to save money. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.